Hi, this is Craig Keener, and I like to talk about the Bible and how to interpret it in the right ways. Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of errors in interpretation. So, for example, sometimes we have people who are so conservative that they think that King James wrote the entire Bible. Others think that the Bible actually says that cleanliness is next to godliness. Then there are others who may go to a foot washing service and they are so misinformed that they think that people will get a greater blessing if they leave their feet as stinky as possible. And then you have those people that just everybody in the church knows that they're really hypocrites. Then you have people who twist the Bible so much that they want to sell you rapture helmets so that you won't damage the roof or your head as you go up in the rapture. Now, there are others who have the practical consideration that if you're actually speeding on the way to church and you don't want to mar your witness, they have electronic bumper stickers that automatically flash out so that nobody knows that you're a Christian when you're speeding through that traffic light. Some of these errors actually are the fault of ministers who prey on biblical illiterates. And, well, that's why many ministers have homiletics malpractice insurance. So they can't get sued too much if they take scripture out of context. But really, the consequences can be disastrous. There was one cat so misinformed by their minister that the cat actually thought that it really had 9 lives. Some ministers will seek to be ministers in congregations for which they're not really qualified. So, for example, the one koala bear that was trying to pretend to be a panda bear or vice versa. Now, you would think that ministers who go to seminary will get everything straight, but seminary students have their own problems. I mean, think of the seminarian who was being tested and couldn't remember who wrote Paul's letter to the Romans. Or the seminarian who was so excited that they found out that the Bible actually contains a book of Acts, no book of Hatchet, but a book of Acts at least. And then someone who got sort of a wrong lesson from their Revelation class. Some students really don't study the way they should. They think that the way to get a leg up on their studies is simply to relax. And there are others who have the wrong understanding of what the professor meant by a due date. Namely, they thought that was the date that they were supposed to do it. And then you have people who are almost as bad, and they start the paper the night before. Then you have the students who actually cheat in seminary. So, for example, those who use footnotes. They have the notes written on their feet. Or you have the seminary students who actually cheat with their tongue. You know, that's what they mean by they have the answer on the tip of their tongue. The answer is written there. One student was expelled from seminary due to plagiarism. However, he did become extremely successful later in life as the author of Pilgrim's Progress, the King James Bible, Chronicles of Narnia, and a number of other books that he really didn't write. Professors sometimes also in papers detect that a student has performed what we might call a snow job. Now, what may be worse is when students misinterpret the professor's instructions. For example, when they capitalize the letter I throughout, even when it should be a small I, and they think there's nothing wrong with that because after all, the Bible and the Code of Hammurabi both speak of an eye for an eye. Sometimes their problems are simply because they lack the proper prerequisites. For example, the prerequisites in math. They can't count the Trinity, for example. Or they lack the proper geometry requirements to understand the Wesleyan quadrilateral. Of course, some seminary professors don't help. Some of them don't believe the Bible anyway. There was this one professor, he really had to retract his statements about the book of Jonah after he was swallowed by the same large aquatic creature. Well, that professor had been too liberal. Some other professors are too conservative. For example, the recent professor who wrote an entire monograph on the historical reliability of Psalms. Now, others are just, well, weird. I mean, for example, the professor who came up with, well, after empirical data forced him to change his view, came up with the partial rapture theory. Or those who think that, you don't know the date of the rapture, so the date of the rapture's just up in the air. And then you have professors trying so hard to be contemporary and bringing in language like groovy. Worst of all, though, theologians often, when they're trying to refute their opponents, they use a straw man argument. Sometimes theologians also split hairs, which is not really something that I have to worry about since I don't have very many of them. And even the best of us professors have our idiosyncrasies. For example, the professor who was told that the backlight was not working, and he said, no, the backlight is where it's always been. Or the professor who said, I'm not absent-minded. I always remember my wife's anniversary. It's my own that I forget. Or the professor, this was someone who was really against the Wesleyan quadrilateral, used predestinarian grading. That is, he predestined the grades before the class took place. Professors often are guilty of avoiding the very elephant in the room. And some of them have a mind like a steel trap that's been rusted shut. Well, sometimes there are divisions because of misunderstanding. A very sad day in church history was the day that Martin Luther unfriended his theological adversaries on Facebook. Seminary training can sometimes be deficient. Simon Magus, known to us from Acts chapter 8, and then some later church fathers talked about him in relation to Gnosticism. I don't know if that was accurate or not. But Simon Magus sued his seminary when he found out that Philip could perform actual miracles. Now, sometimes it's not the professor's fault. Sometimes the student is just cribbing their sermon from the internet. And woe to them if the professor happens to visit them on that Saturday or Sunday or whenever they're preaching. Now, sound hermeneutics should train you so that you're able to discern error. You should be able to challenge reigning paradigms. Although many seminarians, somewhere around the middle of the semester, are so broke that they would settle for a pair of nickels or something of that nature as well. They should be able to distinguish wolves in sheep's clothing, so no one can pull the wool over their eyes. We want our students to achieve such exegetical mastery that they fall in love with Leviticus and they understand what's really going on when Moses is hailing Pharaoh.